folks, how's it going? The world has a major debt problem right now. We've talked about this before. In fact, it's a currently recurring theme with a lot of prepper channels. And I know a lot of people are really sick and tired of hearing all the doom and gloom, all the talk about like the world is going to end and all of that. I understand that. And in fact, there's a lot of people out there that they've reached the point where they're at, okay, if it's going to happen, just let it happen and let's get it over with. And I understand that. I really do. But we're at a point where we can do one of two things. We can either look at what's going on with open eyes, face it head on, and understand where we are and what's coming, and try to use that knowledge to figure out how best to survive or thrive, hopefully, through whatever is coming our way. Or we can turn our backs to the news and say, I don't want to deal with all this drama. I don't want to deal with all this doom and gloom, and just focus on our gardens and our backyard chickens and the next book we're reading and what have you. And there's pros and cons to both, I suppose. The benefit to the latter would be, well, you're building your systems of support, and you're not stressing out as much. The con to that, though, is that you don't really know what's coming because you're not paying attention to it. Paying attention to what's happening and what's coming does cause stress. It comes off as very dramatic to a lot of people, but sometimes it's necessary to put ourselves in a position where we have to look at these things, as uncomfortable as they are. We have to look at some of these things and face the reality of what we're looking at, what we're living through, and what could potentially be coming our way. You're not going to survive the Great Reset or an economic collapse or what have you by living in denial and sticking your head in the sand and just focusing on a garden. As much as I wish that were the case, that's not what's going to happen. Sure, focusing on gardens and things like that, that will help, but you're going to be caught blindsided by certain things in the end. So we have to look at what's happening around us. As uncomfortable as it may make us, and as discouraging as it can be sometimes, we have to be honest with ourselves about the threats that we're facing. This article comes from CNN, and it's titled exactly what I started this video out with. The world has a major debt problem. Is a reset coming? So here we go. They're already talking about the reset. They're not calling it the Great Reset, but they are calling it a reset. And essentially what they're talking about in this article is an economic default, a financial default of the country, and potentially multiple countries around the world. Let's get into the article. The world is in debt, a record amount of debt. $300 trillion to be exact. That's the total amount that governments, households, and corporations around the world owed in June 2022, as estimated by the Institute of International Finance. That number is about 349% of global gross domestic product, and the equivalent of $37,500 in debt for every single person in the world. The world's leverage is much higher than it was before the global financial crisis. The government debt to GDP ratio shot up to reach 102% by 2022. Why it matters. The demand for debt to help consumers with inflation, rebuild infrastructure, and address climate change keeps on increasing, wrote Terry Chan, Alexandra Dmitrievic with S&P Global Ratings in a report on Friday. Rising interest rates and slowing economies are making the debt burden heavier, they write. Fed funds and European central banks rates were up an average of 3 percentage points in 2022. That could mean $3 trillion more dollars in interest expenses alone. At the same time, note Chan and Dmitrievic, debt has become less productive since 2007. That means the value of each additional dollar borrowed adds to the economy has decreased. Let me say that again. That means the value that each additional dollar borrowed adds to the economy has decreased. Basically what I've been saying before. The more you have of something, the less value it has. Sand is not worth a lot of money because it's everywhere. You can go to any beach and find sand. Diamonds are harder to come by, thus they have more value. When you take something like money and double the amount in circulation, you cut its value by 50%. And that's what's happened since 2008. It's been an ongoing theme with the government for longer than that. But it really started accelerating in 2008 with the financial crisis. We saw several countries go into default. Greece, for example, banks had to be bailed out and stimulus checks had to be mailed out. The housing market collapsed because people couldn't afford their mortgages. The foreclosure rate skyrocketed. Well, we're seeing that all over again. What they did back then did not solve the problem. Despite what they may tell you, it did not solve the problem. It merely postponed it. What we're facing now is almost a repeat pattern of what happened in 2008, and even going back to the Great Depression. It's a repeat of the same bad policies, the same bad choices, but it's going to end up being much, much worse. And again, I know people don't want to hear the doom and gloom. They're sick of it. But denying that it's coming, ignoring the fact that this is what our governments have led us to, doesn't change anything. It only makes you less aware and less prepared. You're less informed. If you ignore all of this information, you're less informed, so you can't make good decisions. Okay, so what it means. Higher interest rates are already hurting governments and corporations with low credit ratings. Low-income households are also struggling with the rising cost of credit card, mortgage, and auto debt. If debt accumulation continues and central banks continue their rate hikes, that burden and fears of a recession will grow. I just read an article the day before yesterday, I believe, and I forgot to print it out as well, where they talked about the amount of credit card debt has skyrocketed over the past year and a half. Whereas before the pandemic, we were at personal credit card debt was roughly at a like 3 to 4% rate. It's jumped up 16%. People are increasingly relying on credit cards and loans to get them through because they can't afford to buy food and pay their bills. The problem with that is that at some point those loans are going to come due, and they already can't maintain their their lifestyle, their living situation on what they're making from day to day, from week to week. And they've just added more debt to themselves through credit cards and loans and mortgages in an effort to try to stay afloat through all this mess. That can only end one way. More people taking on more debt, more people are going to end up filing bankruptcy. And then you add in layoffs, higher interest rates making mortgages more expensive. It's a disaster waiting to happen. Let's see. Where was I? When the yield on government debt increases, borrowing also becomes more expensive for corporations. So it's not just, as much as people like to blame corporations for being greedy and getting big tax breaks, corporations do feel some pain from all of this. Companies in the U.S. feel the trickle-down effect of increased interest rates and may have to raise prices or reduce their spending on growth and expansion to keep up. Rising interest rates also impact stock prices. The Federal Reserve's hikes in 2022 contributed to a nearly 20% decline in the S&P 500. So what comes next? There's no easy way out of a global debt crisis, write Chan and Dmitrievic. Avoiding a crisis will require unpopular actions and a great reset. I stand corrected. They actually did call it a great reset of policymaker mindset. So there they go. They're actually talking about the great reset here. That may mean more cautious lending, curbing overconsumption, and restructuring projects or entities that don't make a profit. We're already seeing all of that. We're already seeing all of that in a lot of businesses right now. Companies restructuring and laying off, not borrowing as much money, prices are going up. But this is going to take place not just in corporations. This is the kind of thing that's also going to take place in governments as well. But it's going to be a little bit different in the government because government will not decrease in size. They'll just print more money, which is going to fuel this fire of an economic disaster even more. About that debt limit. Hitting the debt ceiling is a big worry in Washington. They're talking about it right now. The possibility of reaching the self-imposed cap on how much money the U.S. government can borrow currently looms large. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned that the U.S. could hit it as early as Thursday. Congress can avoid the partial government shutdowns, potential cash flow shortfalls, and even the possibility of default by simply raising the ceiling as it has in past. In other words, by borrowing more money. The ceiling is nothing more than a self-imposed limit the government has placed on itself on how much money it can borrow. So every time they lift that, they raise that ceiling, they're saying, okay, well, the limit we put on ourselves, our own self-discipline is not good enough. We need more money, so we're going to raise the ceiling up a little bit more. Imagine if individuals did that with their financials. Everybody would be in bankruptcy right now. The only reason the government isn't in bankruptcy, which we, by all definitions and technicalities, we should be, is because they can manipulate the money supply. They can manipulate numbers, and they can print money essentially whenever they need it through the Fed. Congress can avoid the partial government shutdowns and potential cash flow shortfalls, and even the possibility of default by simply raising the ceiling as it has in the past. But House Republicans have said they will not support increasing the borrowing limit this time around unless Democrats agree to spending cuts and other concessions. In her letter to Congress this weekend, Yellen warned that without action, the U.S. could default on its debt by June. Failure to meet the government's obligations would cause irreparable harm to the U.S. economy, the livelihoods of all Americans, and global financial stability, she wrote. Indeed, in the past, even threats that the U.S. government might fail to meet its obligations have caused real harm, including the only credit rating downgrade in the history of our nation in 2011. I would submit that reckless borrowing and spending is what causes irreparable harm to the U.S. economy, not trying to rein in spending. But, that's just my personal opinion. If I'm making $600 a week at a job and I'm spending $900 a week, then borrowing more money is not going to solve anything. It's just going to make things worse for me. But cutting spending, as painful as it would be one way out of that self-imposed disaster. Moody's Analytics sees a failure to lift the debt limit as cataclysmic. Researchers believe the effects would be a GDP decline of almost 4 percentage points, 6 million lost jobs, and stock prices plunging by 1/3. Okay, the next portion of this article goes into Bitcoin staging a comeback and all of that. I'm not going to go into the Bitcoin part. The last of it talks about China. China just posted one of its worst economic performances in decades. China's economy expanded by just 3% in 2022, far below the government's own target. And understand that China manipulates its numbers even worse than the United States does. As bad as we are about doing it, everything is government controlled over there, making one of the worst performances in nearly half a century, reports my colleague Laura Hay. I may be mispronouncing her last name. The country's growth was impacted heavily by months of widespread COVID lockdowns and a historic downturn in the property market. China's domestic economy has suffered unexpected shocks in 2022, including frequent COVID outbreaks and extreme heat waves, Kang Yi, director of the MBS, told a press conference in Beijing. The triple pressures of demand contraction, supply shocks, and weakening expectations continue to evolve, and the complexity, severity, and uncertainty of the environment are increasing. China had taken a zero tolerance approach to the coronavirus since the pandemic began, but 3 years of restrictions have wreaked havoc on the economy, sparked public anger, and placed extraordinary pressure on local governments' finances. Amid growing pressure, the government abruptly changed course in early December, effectively ending its controversial zero COVID policy. However, while the easing of restrictions was a relief for many, its abruptness caught the public off guard, leaving people largely to fend for themselves. And then it goes into the rapid spread of infection drove many people indoors and empty shops and restaurants. Factories and companies have also been forced to shut or cut production because more workers got sick. You know, a lot of this is just the same thing that we've been talking about over and over and over. But again, like I've said in the past, every day we're getting more and more confirmation that what everybody calls a conspiracy theory, the Great Reset, the economic collapse, every day we're getting more confirmation that this is the direction we're headed. This is what's facing us. And again, denying what's happening doesn't help you. Ignoring what's happening so you can feel stress-free and happy and everything, that doesn't save you either. I mean, we all want to be as free of stress and drama as possible, but this is the reality of the situation we're in. This is the reality of our lives at the moment, caused by the people that we've elected, along with a large number of people that we haven't even had the ability to elect. They just manipulate everything behind the scenes through their power that they wield, and they're not elected into office. The vast majority of them are not elected, and the vast majority of the policies they impose are never voted on. A good example of that is the current meeting in Davos, which is going on as we speak. The world's elite are gathering to tell us how we're going to live over the next few years. You know, Klaus Schwab, people like him, they want us to be at each other's throats so that we can't Sorry about that, folks. My battery's almost dead. They want us to be at each other's throats so we can't prepare for what's coming. But this is what's coming. And what I'm going to be doing is real simple. I'm staying aware of all of this stuff. Even though it causes me stress, I try to stay aware of all this stuff. But my goal is to focus on building redundancy in my life, building systems of support for myself so that if the systems I rely on the grid go down, I can maintain my quality of life as best as I possibly can. So I can remain free of the system as much as possible. That means gardens, stocking food, raising livestock, building a network of people you can rely on and barter with. Being able to produce your own power, your own water. That's what you need to be doing. That's what I'm focused on. My battery's about dead, so I've got to go. I hope you found this useful and helpful. I appreciate you guys watching. Like, share, subscribe if you haven't. Take care, folks. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves and your families. Be nice to each other. We as individuals are not our... You are not my enemy and I'm not your enemy. That's just what they want us to believe. We shouldn't be fighting amongst ourselves. We should be helping each other out. That's all I've got. Until next time, folks. I'll catch you later.